Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I picked Duluth because the cold does half the work for you. The wind coming off Lake Superior strips heat from steel until it aches. If the infected slow down in low temperatures the way the radio said, then a winter by the harbor might be the one advantage I could afford. I am not a soldier. I am a mechanic who knows how to keep engines running when they want to quit. My shop sits in a row of brick boxes off West 1st Street, a short roll down the hill from Piedmont Avenue. It has a grease pit, 2 roll-up doors, a side personnel door, and a roof thick enough to stand on. When the sirens faded into static, I welded what I could, bolted what I could not weld, and promised myself I would last until the first real snow. I started with the roll-up doors because they are always the weak point. Each door ran in a steel track with spring assists overhead. I locked the springs with carriage bolts through the drums, then stitched lengths of angle iron down both tracks so the door could not jump free if someone slammed it. I welded 2 crossbars from scrap bed rails and pinned them with 3/4-inch hitch pins. The center latches were decent, but I added through bolts with fender washers that spread force across the door slats. The final touch was a pair of removable braces that drop into floor anchors behind each door like kickstands, so even if the panels bend, the braces still take the load. The personnel door was newer. I flipped the strike plate and replaced the screws with 4-inch deck screws that bit deep into the framing. I added a second deadbolt and a drop bar that nests into 2 welded cups. Every part got labeled with paint pen. Bar left, bar right, pins. Because panic makes you forget obvious things. I backed the door with a stacked set of tire racks loaded with filled totes. Weight is security when you are the only one lifting. Power was the next problem. The grid across Duluth flickered for 2 days after the first emergency alerts. Minnesota Power must have been doing miracles, reclosing breakers and isolating faults because the mills on Rice's Point were dark, but pockets of houses on the hill kept blinking alive. I could not plan around luck. I had a Honda EU 7000's inverter generator that I serviced for a snowplow contractor. It ran quiet compared to open-frame units, and it would sip fuel if I kept the load light. I built a plywood doghouse over its parking spot in the alley, framed with rock wool insulation and lined with a cement board. I cut 2 baffled vents and aimed the exhaust into a scavenged automotive catalytic converter with a length of stainless flex pipe to cool and diffuse the heat. Every clamp got safety wire. Noise discipline matters. Anything that hums becomes an invitation. I mounted the doghouse on 4 hockey pucks to isolate vibration from the concrete, then strapped the generator to the base so it would not wander and make the exhaust leak. Inside the shop, I kept loads predictable. LED lights on one circuit, battery charger on another, and a small ceramic heater only when I could spare the watts. I replaced the halogen trouble lights with magnetic LEDs I could aim at specific tasks. A kilowatt meter on the main cord told me the truth when my hopes wanted to lie. Winter in Duluth is not just cold, it is dry skin, frozen locks, and a wind that creeps around seals you thought were tight. I went through the building with a smoke pencil and sealed the drafts with silicone, foam, and strips of EPDM rubber from old inner tubes. The big shop windows already had steel bars. I backed them with polycarbonate panels held by self-tapping screws and neoprene washers so the screws would not crack the sheets. Polycarbonate does not shatter like glass, it flexes. I needed flexibility because whatever was coming would hit hard and weird. Fuel would decide whether I stayed or walked. I had gasoline treated with stabilizer in 2 steel drums, 110 gallons if I did not spill a drop. I rolled them onto drum cradles and ran a hand pump with a built-in filter. I wrote dates on painter's tape and set a rotation calendar on the wall. 2 hours on, 4 hours off, then a long blackout overnight to save fuel. During the blackouts, I ran a 12-volt lighting circuit off LifePo 4 batteries I salvaged from a golf cart shop on Haynes Road. A 2-kilowatt inverter handled tool charging and the radio. The batteries liked the cold better than lead acid and did not off-gas. Heat is where you betray yourself. If you heat too much, you melt your own resolve. If you heat too little, you make slow mistakes with your hands. I dug into a corner and built a rocket-style heater out of fire brick and a 6-inch chimney that slipped through a stainless thimble in the wall. I fed it scrap hardwood and pallet blocks. It was work, tending the feed tube with a welding glove, but it gave off a steady dry heat with very little smoke once it warmed up. The generator stayed off when the rocket heater was going because combustion and gasoline fumes do not mix. I wrote that twice in my notebook. Water came from the hose bib outside until the city's pressure died. I was ready for that. I had 3 food-grade barrels with closed tops and bung caps. I filled them while the water still ran and stacked them on pallets. A small RV pump on a battery gave me pressure to a sink. I had bleach, filters, and the patience to let sediment settle. For washing, I set up a camp shower bag over a steel tub. I kept myself on a schedule because schedules are anchors when the clock outside loses its numbers. I listened on a Baofeng handheld first, then a proper ham radio I found at an estate sale the prior year. I did not broadcast much, I scanned. I learned the feel of dead air. I noted call signs that repeated and started to recognize voices out of Superior, out of Hermantown, and one thin voice that said it was from Park Point near the aerial lift bridge. The schedules on those voices slipped and faded, like someone trying to hang on while the water pulled at their boots. On the second night after I sealed the doors, the tapping started. It was not loud, it was not frantic, it was one steady tap on the lower panel of the east roll-up door, then silence. I looked at my watch and marked it. 5 minutes later, another tap. Always 5. It went on for an hour, then 2. I stood with my ear near the steel and listened to the cold come through with the sound. It did not scrape, it did not shove, it tapped. I told myself it was thermal contraction. Then I took the flashlight and climbed to the roof. From the roof, I could see down the alley to where the dumpsters used to sit and the backs of the other service buildings. Beyond them, the hill rose with houses like boxes drawn in pencil, their windows dark. The lake was a black plate with a pale band where the sky held a little light. At the door below, near the ground, stood a shape with shoulders forward and head tilted. It was not wearing much, just a thin jacket, and it must have been freezing. It raised its hand, paused, and tapped the panel again as if keeping time with a metronome. Then it went still. Any movement out there is dangerous. Not for what it is, but for what it calls. I kept still, breathed through my nose, and counted. The body's sway was slow, like a person at rest on a bus. When the 5 minutes rolled over, the hand lifted, tapped, lowered. Nothing else. No shuffle, no sniffing at the door edges, no rattle at the handle. Just that quiet practice of time. I backed off the roof, slid down the ladder with gloves on, and pulled the battery on the interior camera. I had aimed at the door so its infrared light would not leak under the panel at night. I slept in the office that night with my coat on and my boots near the chair. I kept a Remington pump shotgun propped beside the desk with the chamber empty and the magazine loaded with buckshot. The next morning, I replaced the top round with a slug. When you shoot indoors, the sound throws your thoughts against the walls like loose parts, and I wanted fewer shots, not more. I reminded myself that I was not here to fight. I was here to maintain. The third day came with wind and spitting snow. I let the generator run 2 hours for battery charging and to fill the pressure tank on the water line, then shut it down. I scrubbed the stovepipe cap, checked the spark arrestor, and split more wood with the quiet rhythm I learned in a winter that felt normal. The tapping did not stop. It ran through the day every 5 minutes. When the wind drove snow against the east door, I thought that might discourage it. It just tapped again, then let the cold air pile deeper around its legs. By the 5th day, I started to log the taps. Not each one, there were too many, but the hours the pattern persisted. I made a grid in the notebook with times, and I shaded blocks for tapping present or tapping absent. The shaded area looked like a barcode after 2 days. Long, unbroken sections, with short gaps. I would doze, jerk awake at minute 4, wait through minute 5, and hear the confirm. I could not prove it, but it felt like the taps anchored time for both of us. Fuel sat like a number on my shoulder. I had counted on snowplow work to bring me business this winter, which meant I stocked oil filters and hydraulic fluid instead of more gasoline. I had 3 5-gallon jugs of kerosene for a small heater I never planned to use in the shop because of the fumes. It could work in the office with the window cracked and a carbon monoxide detector wired to the 12-volt circuit. I tested the heater by lighting it outside first, letting the wick stabilize, then carrying it in. With the generator off and the rocket heater banked, the kerosene heater kept the office at 45 degrees. It was not comfortable, but it protected fingers. I rationed oil for everything else. I measured with syringes I used to fill small engines. I wrote half fill in pencil on a dozen lines of the daily checklist because no one will steal my oil but my own bad memory. Every drain pan got filtered through a fine mesh and a coffee filter to catch metal grit. Waste oil went into a labeled tote with a lid. People will tell you a diesel engine will run on anything. That is not true in the real world when your goal is survival and not a show. Sludge kills injectors. Injectors are not something I want to machine by hand while tired. I did not intend to leave the shop unless I had to, but you cannot fix what you do not see, and the city changes fast when no one is around to argue with it. I set a rule: sunlight only, 1 hour, never the same route twice in a row. I put on insulated coveralls, a wool hat, leather gloves, and ice cleats that bit the sidewalk. I carried a small pack with a radio, water, and a laminated card with "if found," and my shop address in plain handwriting because I knew the paramedics were not coming, but neighbors might still exist. The shotgun stayed in the office. For the street, I carried a Ruger 1022 with a 10-round magazine and subsonic rounds. Quiet matters. I do not want to attract, I want to interrupt, then leave. Miller Hill Mall sat quiet like a parked ship. Parking lots hold wind because there is nothing to stop it, but they also hold salt barrels and sand. I rolled a 50-pound bag of salt into a garden wagon and pulled it back like I used to pull axles. Along the way, I passed a city truck idling with its door open. The radio chattered to itself in recorded loops. A vest lay in the seat. No one was around. In the cab were keys, gloves, a half-eaten sandwich frozen into a brick, and a little spiral notebook with plow routes. I copied the routes by hand to my notes, took the gloves as a spare set, and turned the engine off. A warm engine in a quiet city acts like a lighthouse to the wrong ships. By the tire store on Maple Grove Road, I found a pallet of windshield washer fluid left outside the rear door, like an offering to a future that never arrived. I took 4 jugs because washer fluid is mostly alcohol and water, and will not freeze as a low-temperature cleaner. It also works to de-ice locks and thaw a frozen padlock if you are patient. The pallet tempted me to return with the truck, but I knew better than to change rules so early in the winter. I pulled the wagon and felt every tug in my shoulders. Back at the shop, I salted the alley just enough to scuff up the ice. I do not want a clean path anyone else can read in the snow. I hung a moving blanket behind the east door to kill interior echoes. The tapping continued, measured and calm. In the beam of a flashlight through a tiny pinhole, the shape's cheeks looked pale. The right sleeve was torn. The hand was clean. No dirt under the nails. No blood on the knuckles. That detail made my head ring for reasons I did not want to examine. On the 8th night, I heard a different sound between taps. A light clink, then the slightest scratch as if something metal touched the door and slid a fraction of an inch. I got on the floor with my ear to the steel and waited for the next tap. Tap, pause, tap, pause. Then a slow drag like a key or a coin. I waited for the next cycle and slid a thin feeler gauge under the door. Something knocked it gently and stopped. I pulled my hand back. Curiosity pulls people into bad places. I wrote "no contact" in the log in block letters. The nights were longer now. Duluth does that to you. By late afternoon, the light fades and the harbor turns the color of old aluminum. I filled my pockets with tasks because a human who has nothing to do will start answering questions he should leave alone. I rebuilt a set of CV axles for a client who would not be back for them. I stripped a small engine carburetor and soaked it in cleaner. I made a checklist for the generator complete with torque specs for the exhaust clamps. I tested every breaker and wrote which outlets they controlled in permanent marker. The act of naming where the electrons flow made the building feel less like a cave. Every day I walked to the roof with a garbage bag and picked up whatever had blown onto it overnight. A piece of flashing old leaves, a scrap of paper with the Minnesota Vikings schedule for a season that would never finish. I cleared the drains and shoveled the drift that formed by the parapet. I checked my sight lines to the alley and to the lake. I kept a pair of binoculars and a sealed ammo can to keep them dry. From the roof, I saw a red minivan parked catty-corner near an auto glass shop. It was there yesterday. Today, the rear gate was open. It stayed open through the afternoon. It is always the small movements that tell you who is left. On the radio, I heard the Park Point voice again. It was a woman, and she gave names to the hours even when there was nothing to say. 11 in the morning, she would say, wind from the northeast, and then list any vessels she saw from her window, even though there were none. She said her name was Elena. She had been a nurse once. She asked sometimes if anyone knew whether the Blatnick Bridge was passable. She did not beg. She did not sell hope. She marked time the way I marked taps. I did not answer. I told myself it was for operational security. The real reason was softer. I did not want to be added to someone else's ledger. On a Tuesday, my notes still used days for a while. Before I let the calendar slip, I heard a plow blade clatter 2 streets up. The sound came in bursts, wrong rhythm, not the steady run of a truck pushing a windrow. I stepped to the roof, stayed behind the parapet and watched. A city plow rolled past in second gear, the blade up. The front wheel on the driver's side wobbled. No one sat in the cab. The truck crept downhill like a slow toy, engine idling, transmission engaged. At the intersection, it clipped a stop sign, hopped to the curb, and stopped at the building across from mine. It sat there, idling until it ran out of fuel that night. I put another circle in my notebook labeled "Sounds that Call the Wrong Crowds." The one at my door was still there. Cold had stiffened its posture, but the hand still rose when the 5 minutes turned and fell with a solid, dull tap. Once, at dawn, a second figure shuffled into the alley. It paused near the dumpster pad, turned its head slowly, then drifted toward the street where the tracks were numerous and confusing. The one at my door did not move, even when the other came within 10 yards. When the 5 minutes rolled over, the hand lifted and tapped as if the world outside did not exist. I thought about rhythm. People drum their fingers when they are bored. Mechanics tap wrenches to listen for change in pitch. I have tapped on engine blocks to find voids and tapped on tires to hear which one holds a nail. Tapping is inquiry. Tapping is a question with a minor key. I listened another day and asked myself what question was being asked of me and what I would risk by answering. On the 12th night, the generator coughed during the evening run. The load was light, the fuel was clean, the filter bowl was clear. The cough repeated at regular intervals like a person clearing a throat. I shut it down and opened the doghouse. Condensation beaded the inside of the lid. The exhaust clamp had loosened a fraction, and the joint had a soot ring. That much carbon monoxide could put me to sleep forever if it filled the doghouse and found its way inside. I cleaned the joint, retorqued the clamp, and added a second clamp as a backup. I drilled a drain hole at the lowest part of the doghouse so water would find gravity instead of staying to argue later. My oil reserves were not where I wanted them. The tally on the whiteboard crept down. I started supplementing the batteries with a small solar trickle charger I found in the back of the store from springtime fishing boats. Winter sun at this latitude does not give gifts, but a dribble of charge is a dribble less gasoline. I moved tools to daylight hours. I turned lights off whenever I could. I did inventory by headlamp and wrote with a pencil because pens complain in the cold. The line, "We can make this stretch," on the board was not comfort, it was assignment. That same week I heard a voice on the radio that was not Elena. Male voice, Midwestern vowels stretched a little. He said his name was Malik. He used to work for the utility. He said he was near the paper plant and that he was trying to get a small hydro plant west of town to run in islanded mode to keep his neighborhood alive. He asked if anyone had a spare set of three-phase breakers and a manual for a governor from the 1980s. He laughed when he said it. The laugh had sawdust in it. He did not sound desperate. He sounded like a guy who would rig a fix and sleep under the cabinet. I made a note to listen for that voice again. Wind sharpened. I hung moving blankets between the shop and the office to create an airlock. I wrapped the water lines with heat tape and insulation and put them on the generator schedule so they could not silently burst when I was not watching. I set 2 5-gallon pails with lids by the office door for use when it was too cold to run the water. I am a mechanic. I do not like surprises from systems. When systems surprise you, it is because you did not ask a question they needed you to ask. On the 15th day, I decided to answer the tapping. I did not open the door. I did not speak. I took a small 3/8 ratchet and tapped back once 5 minutes after its tap, like a reflection. The response took the same 5 minutes as before. Tap. Then 5 minutes later, tap. I tapped again, the same way, no rush. I did this for an hour and nothing else changed. Outside, the figure did not lean closer or sniff at the seal. It did not test the edges of the frame. It did not scrape fingernails or gnash teeth. It kept time, blind to the rest. After an hour, I changed the pattern. I tapped twice, evenly spaced. The next tap from outside came after 5 minutes, still single. I tapped twice again and waited. The outside answer stayed single. I put the ratchet down and sat with my back to the forklift tire, the rubber cold through my jacket. I set my watch alarm for 5 minutes. Tap, the door said. Tap, tap, I replied. The door said tap again. There's a kind of conversation made from limits. I dreamed that night about a shop class where the teacher held a metronome and cranked the weight up the stem. The tick got slower and slower until it clicked only once every hour. All of us stood around and waited. When it clicked, we nodded, like we understood what to do, but none of us did. I woke in the dark office, the kerosene heater low, the CO detector light green, the sound of the lake like a train far away. The tapping crawled into the edges of the dream and sat there, patient. I took the long way around the block the next day to look at my own building like a stranger. The brick held, the windows glowed pale, the doghouse for the generator looked like a forgotten crate. Footprints told too much. I brushed snow to blur mine. Across the street, a barber shop had taped notices to its window about postponed appointments. The dates were a week old. In the reflection, I saw my hat, my eyes, the street behind me. I kept moving. At lunch, I opened one of the field ration packs left in my back room from a towing company that paid in trade. The date said it was still good. The entree smelled like salt and cardboard comfort. I ate half and wrapped the rest. I measured calories because work schedules better when you treat food like fuel and not surprise. I wrote beans tonight as a joke to myself and smiled one of those smiles you feel more in your chest than your face. In the afternoon, a snow squall came across the lake like a curtain. Visibility dropped to 20 yards. I turned off the generator to listen. The tapping did not stop. The figure outside must have been coated in snow, but on the 5th minute, the hand lifted, tapped, lowered. I stood with my hand against the steel and felt the vibration through my palm. A door can be a drum when you are tired enough. I wanted to move the blankets, light the rocket heater, and forget the pattern for an hour. I held my ground because maintenance is easier than repair, and I knew what would happen if the rocket stove's draft pulled smoke into the office. Just before dusk, the radio snapped awake. Elena again, voice steady, breath a little shallow like she had climbed stairs. She said the canal by the aerial lift bridge was starting to crust with skim ice near the edges. She said she had a neighbor named Ruth who kept notes on birds, and that the birds were quieter this week than last. If anyone hears me, she added. I figured out how to keep the thermostat from kicking the fan. Just heat the room you are in. She clicked off. I stayed still. I told myself I would reply when the snow got deep enough to keep strangers slow. That night, I laid out the truck keys on the desk and matched tags to vehicles I maintained for clients. The snowplow contractor had an old 3/4 ton with a Fisher blade and decent tires. The battery would need a jump. The city truck I had killed earlier had a broken front spring shackle. I could fix that if I needed to scavenge parts from it. Tool lists are comfort blankets. I made one for a run to the hardware store. Deck screws, more foam, chimney brush, more batteries for the CO detector, pipe clamps, fuel stabilizer, a pry bar because you can always use another pry bar. In the morning, the sky cleared. The tapping continued. I ate oatmeal with a dash of cinnamon, heated water on the rocket stove, and stood by the door with my ratchet in my hand like a conductor who refuses to lift the baton. After an hour of this stalemate, I changed something small. I slid a business card under the door with a paperclip taped to it and scratched one line on it with a pencil. Why 5? I kept a fingertip on the edge and pushed it out a few inches, then pulled it back. The little metal paperclip snagged on something, stopped, then a hand tapped the door carefully and the card slid back toward me as if guided by a yard of patience. The line I scratched had a second faint diagonal next to it, like a check mark pressed through the card from outside. No other mark. I do not know what I expected. A person would have written something. A thing that does not write, that cannot, could still press. The check mark had not been made by a fingernail. It was too clean. Maybe a small key, maybe a clipped coin. Maybe it was nothing but pressure. I held the card in my fingers for a minute, then slid it back into the notebook between generator schedule and cold soak time for carburetor. The next 2 days put down 4 inches of dry snow that hissed under feet and muted every echo. The barometer climbed. My breath hung in the shop like pale smoke. I set out 2 5-gallon buckets and a funnel with a t-shirt filter and drained 3 quarts of used oil through it slowly. I watched the drip as if it were a clock. Every 5 minutes the door reminded me. Tap, tap. When night came, I banked the rocket stove and lit the kerosene heater in the office. I set the CO detector where my eyes would fall on it first if I woke half asleep. I hung the shotgun in a loop on the side of the desk where I could reach it but not bump it. I walked to the roof at dawn with the binoculars and scanned the lake. No ships, just ice crystals tinseling the edges like an idea not ready to commit. Down on the street, 2 deer trotted between parked cars with their breath puffing. They stopped, ears forward, then slipped away. I tracked their prints until they merged with a confusion of human tracks near a pharmacy. I turned away because sometimes you should not know which tracks stop. Midday, the radio found Malik again. He said the little hydro near Thompson could run if he could get enough load to keep the governor happy. He was trying to blackstart a neighborhood with a handful of loads that would not spike. He asked if anyone had resistive loads like space heaters they could sync at his signal, then reduce. He was trying to fake a grid with people and their appliances. The idea was steady. I admired it. I knew I could not help without exposing myself. I made a note to remember where I had old baseboard heaters in my storage area. If the snow got thick enough, I could set one outside and run a line without leaving prints that others could follow. I lasted 3 weeks before I spoke on the radio. The tipping point was not a dramatic event. It was a small failure. The office doorknob, which had been loose for years, finally slipped its set screw and rattled like teeth. The noise annoyed me beyond reason. I fixed it twice and it still rattled. The tapping at the door and the knob's rattle combined into a pattern that made my skin hum. I needed a human voice to reset the rhythm. I keyed the mic at noon and said, "Elena, I hear you. I am inland near West First. I have heat and a roof. I can weld. How are you on Park Point?" Her reply came slower than I expected. "I am all right," she said. "I keep a small room warm. My neighbor Ruth and I watch the canal and count the ice. The bridge lifts never come now. I thought about walking, but the point is a long ribbon and there are many places to get stuck. Are you alone?" "Yes." I did not complicate it further. "If you need medical supplies, I can try to look." "We are okay for now," she said. "Thank you for speaking. It helps to have a voice between the hours." Between the hours. I pictured the taps on my door and the way the hand lifted in the 5th minute. I almost told her, and then I did not. I asked if she knew anything about the Blatnick Bridge. She said she could see the span from a window, but distance and winter air make liars of the eyes. She said it looked intact. For 2 days, I spoke to Elena at noon. We traded very little in detail. She told me that Ruth used to be a librarian and kept lists of birds and the dates they arrived in spring. She told me that a man named Kaito operated a ham set from a sailboat frozen into the slip near the Maritime Visitor Center, and that he sometimes relayed messages when the skip was odd. I told her that I could fabricate brackets, and that if she needed something welded, I might be able to bring a small MIG and a bottle and do it on a porch. She laughed gently and said she hoped we would not need a welded porch. It was a quiet, human laugh. It reminded me of a shop in June when the doors are open and the radio is low. The tapping at my door did not change, but I did. I felt myself looking forward to the 5th minute, listened for it the way you listen for a train you know by its horn. I tested myself by counting without a watch, and was close every time. I began to measure tasks in taps. It takes 6 taps to clean and re-oil the chainsaw bar, 4 taps to reorganize the metric sockets, 2 taps to brew coffee on the rocket stove and wait for it to stop spitting. If the hand on the other side kept time, Then the thing on the other side and I shared a clock, even if we did not share a language. One evening, with the wind perfectly still, I heard something new. Faint footsteps far up the alley. They paused. They came on again, careful. When they reached the stretch opposite the generator doghouse, they stopped. I crouched behind the workbench with the radio off and the lights dimmed. The steps resumed, softer now. Then the sound of someone breathing through a scarf. The steps reached the east door and halted a yard from the panel. The tapping continued, tap, and the new breath drew in. A voice, low and steady, said, "If you can hear me in there, I'm not trying to hurt you." The cadence was local, flattened, patient. I have watched that one tap. I am trying to learn what it knows. I kept my mouth shut. The voice waited, then spoke again. "My name is Tom. I drove plow for the city. I am trying to make a quiet path for folks who are still moving. The noise is wrong for that now. So I walk." The tapping hit the panel again. Tom waited until the 5 minutes ended, then said, "If you talk, talk soft. If you do not, it is all right. I wanted you to know that this one—" He paused, and I could hear him gesture. "This one comes from the old community center. There were stories about a class there that kept time with a metronome to help with focus. I think this person was in that class. I think the path burned in deeper than the sickness could erase." He stepped back. "I will come by tomorrow at the same hour and put down a little sand here. That will help you if you have to move fast." He walked away. His steps were careful and then gone. The alley swallowed sound again. The tap resumed on its mark. I waited an hour before I climbed to the roof. A line of sand lay like a sentence next to the door threshold. Tom must have come earlier and done it already, then circled back to talk. A simple thing, a handful of grit, but it meant traction where my boots might one day slip. I marked his name in the notebook and wrote, "Plow driver, quiet, thinks about others." The next day, Tom returned. He spoke softly. "I'm going to put a piece of metal down, a plate between the door and the one that taps. If you ever must open, it will give you a second." He slid a 2x2 plate of 1/4-inch steel to the base of the door and let it rest. A barrier you can reposition is a gift. He left as quietly as he came. That night, Elena said on the radio that she had seen headlights on the Wisconsin side near Superior, too many to be a single vehicle. She heard a horn blow 3 times, pause, blow 3 times again like a code. Then silence. She said the wind had changed and she could smell wood smoke from West End. She asked if I was warm enough. I told her I was. On a morning with air that made the steel ring, I decided to make a fuel run. The board showed the drum-level lines creeping down, and the weather forecast was a lie now because the people who made it were somewhere else. But the sky had that hard blue that follows a dry front. If I waited too long, the snow would get heavier and my footprints would hang around like a notice posted to a door. I chose the snowplow contractor's 3/4-ton truck because I knew it and because it kept a lower profile than the city rig. I bolted the plow blade high, put sandbags over the rear axle for traction, and checked the lugs with a torque wrench because I do not like betting lives on hand tight. I loaded a siphon, 3 gas cans, a come-along winch, a length of chain, bolt cutters, a pry bar, and a folded tarp. The shotgun stayed in the office. The 1022 rode in a scabbard under the bench seat. I wore a plain blue jacket with no reflective tape because I did not want to glow. I slid out the side door, closed it quietly, and stepped into air so cold it made the hair inside my nose sting. The tap at the door sounded behind me. The figure did not turn its head. I stepped around it on Tom's sand and did not breathe until I reached the truck. The streets were a patchwork of wind-polished ice and powder. I steered gentle and slow, no sudden throttle, no hard brake. Duluth roads will punish you for arrogance when dry. In winter, they just remove the pretense. At a storage yard I serviced each spring, I cut the chain on the side gate and slipped in. There were contractor trucks here, a small backhoe, and a dozen portable generators that had been rented out and returned when people still had return dates in their heads. I found a diesel transfer tank and a hand pump. I pumped until my shoulders sang and kept pumping. A sound rose beyond the fence, a snow shovel scraping concrete in long, even strokes. The rhythm was human. I froze with my hand on the pump handle and listened. Scrape, pause, scrape. Whoever it was measured their breathing like a person who knows how to shovel all day. I set the cans down quiet, eased the gate open, and peered out. A man in a green jacket and a knit cap was clearing the apron in front of a garage 2 lots over. He worked with the blade flat, using the weight of the shovel to skim, not to lift. Smart. I could have called out. I did not. I watched until he leaned on the shovel and scanned the street with a slow practice look that said he had done patrol shifts somewhere. He stepped back inside and closed the door with care. I finished my work and left by a different route. On the way back, I saw the red minivan again. This time, the rear gate was shut. I scanned the snow behind it. No fresh prints. At the shop, I unloaded into the drum, filtered slow, logged every quart. I changed the generator oil while it was warm from the afternoon run and replaced the spark plug with a gapped spare. The tapping kept me on time. I started to think of it as a clock I did not have to wind. I told myself that adopting the rhythm did not make me softer. It made me efficient. The truth sat somewhere between the two. 2 days later, the tapping stopped. Not for long, but long enough to make the room feel too big. I waited 5 minutes, nothing. I waited 6, nothing. I picked up the ratchet and tapped once, gentle. The answer came back late, a second or two outside the usual mark, then resumed its 5-minute schedule as if nothing had happened. I could not see the figure's face through the pinhole, not well, but I thought I saw frost thick on the eyebrows. I whispered without keying the radio, "Hang on." That evening, Tom came by again. He did not speak at first. He worked with a bucket of sand, sprinkling it in a small arc in front of the door and around the corners where ice likes to lie in wait. When he was done, he said, "I think the tapping one is losing heat. I brought a piece of foam." He slid a square of closed-cell foam under the plate and tapped the plate 3 times, then stepped away. The tapping did not change. "I will look for a coat tomorrow," he said. "I do not plan to put it on them. I will leave it on a barrel, close enough to be noticed." He left without waiting for my approval. The next day, the coat appeared. An old parka propped on a 55-gallon drum 10 feet from the door, sleeves flapping in the slight wind. The tapping hand did not reach for it. At the 5th minute, the hand rose, tapped, lowered. Tom had put down more sand leading to the drum. I waited and watched and forced myself to do nothing. Control is often an exercise in surrendering other kinds of control. Elena and I added an evening check-in on the radio. It was not long. She would report that the ice had extended farther toward the middle of the canal, that gulls had taken to standing on it and pecking at something only they could see. I would report that I had fuel for another month at my current schedule and that I had built a second baffle in the generator doghouse to break up the exhaust note. She said she listened for that note when the wind came from my direction and that she could not hear it anymore. I felt better than I should have at that. The schedule carried me through the shortest days. January came like a steel bar. Duluth can go quiet in that month in normal years. This year, it went quiet with intention. Snow squeaked under boots. Air inside the shop held the smell of oil and clean metal. I took apart a differential because I could not stand to think about the fact that each day the taps would someday stop, and I wanted a gear with known teeth to hold in my hand. Then, during a mid-afternoon run of the generator, the lights dimmed and pulsed in a way that did not match the engine's tone. It was not the generator. The breaker panel clacked once of its own accord, and a faint glow came from the exit sign I had left unpowered for weeks. I walked to the panel and put my fingertips on the metal. It hummed with a life not from my Honda. Somewhere, somehow, a sliver of grid had come back for a moment. I threw my main disconnect off to keep the inverter and the panel from arguing, and in the silent second that followed, I heard another sound under the tapping, the faintest buzz from a neon beer sign in the bar 2 doors down. It lasted half a minute and died. I keyed the radio. "Malik," I said. "If you are near your set, I just felt a backfeed on West First. Was that you?" A pause. Then, "Hello, friend near West First, that was us. We tied in a scrap of feeder for a test. We are keeping it small, looking for resistive loads to anchor. If you have anything you can switch to grid when you sense voltage. Do it only if you are isolated, please." "I am isolated," I said. "I can put a baseboard heater on a transfer switch to test for you. I will not backfeed." "Thank you," he said. "We will try again at 2 in the afternoon tomorrow for 60 seconds. Listen then." I made a small transfer panel from spare breakers and an interlock kit I had kept in a bin for years, the kind you bolt to keep the grid and the generator from being on at the same time. I wired a single outlet through it and plugged in a baseboard heater. At 2 in the afternoon the next day, the heater hummed warm for a handful of breaths, then went cool. I keyed the mic and said, "Yes, we saw it." Malik sounded satisfied in that way people get when a theory proves stubbornly correct. He said, "Good. We are mapping how far we can push before the old wires start lying to us." The tapping stayed true. I counted days by it now. Tom came every 3 days with sand and sometimes left small offerings a few feet from the door. A thermos, a reflective triangle on a stand, a bag of hand warmers. None of them were taken. He did not take it personally. "You do what you can," he said once, low. "Not everything is for changing." One evening, as I cleaned the rocket stove ash, a sharp report cracked from up the street, then 2 more, spaced and measured. Gunshots can sound like a lot of things in winter, but these were too clean to be a car backfiring. I snapped the lights off and stood still. After a long minute, a 4th report echoed from the other side of the block. Then silence. I waited 10 taps before I moved. The next day, I found what the shots had done. At the auto glass shop, the red minivan's rear window was shattered. The gate still shut. In the snow behind it, just beyond the bumper, lay 3 empty brass casings. They were 9mm. The pattern on the snow suggested a person had stood with both feet set and fired level. No drag marks, no struggle. Prints led away toward the railroad tracks and then spread into a mess among many more. I walked a slow circle, trying not to leave more story than I took. When I returned, a small change waited at my door. On the ground, within the arc of Tom's sand but far enough from the tapping one to be safe, lay a folded piece of paper in a clear plastic sleeve. I lifted it with pliers and carried it inside. On it, in careful block letters, was a list. "We are at the community shop near 21st Avenue West. We fix and share. If you have skills, come at noon. If you need help, hang a ribbon on your door and we will look for you. Do not approach if you are followed." The bottom of the page had 3 names: Tom, Ruth, and Elena. I stared at the names until they blurred. Community. It was a word that had felt like a decoration on a city brochure for so long that I had forgotten it could also be a plan. Noon was 2 hours away. I paced between the workbench and the office, counting taps, thinking about the risk of leaving and the risk of staying and the way the heater hummed when Malik's grid stub lit. I put on my jacket and hat and gloves and opened the side door carefully. I paused with my hand on the knob and listened to the alley. Calm. I stepped onto the sand arc Tom had laid and moved like a man who knows his own weight. The community shop was a former machine shop that had done brake jobs and custom metal. Its yard was fenced with chain link and snow had formed a windrow along it. The front door was open a crack. A ribbon tied to the handle so a person could pull it quietly shut. Inside, heat bloomed from a wood stove built from a barrel kit. 4 people stood in a semicircle near a table with a map spread on it. Elena had silver hair tied back and a nurse's calm. Ruth's coat had patches on the elbows and she held a notebook with a pencil tucked into the spirals. Tom's beard had ice in it. The 4th, a thin man with a knit cap, stood near a hamset with wires leading to a dipole that ran out a window. "Kaito," he said, nodding once. "We keep it simple," Elena said to me with a quick, kind smile. "We fix, we share. We mark the city with colors so we do not have to stand and talk outside. Blue ribbon means heat. Red means danger. Yellow means water. White means nothing inside worth risking for." "We have a few hand signals," Tom added. He showed me a gloved hand with palm down, fingers spread. Slow. A fist next to the chest. Stop. 2 fingers tapped against the wrist where a watch would be. Time. He tapped twice slowly. "We try not to speak outside. We keep the sound in here." Ruth flipped her notebook open to a page with columns. "If you are comfortable, tell us what you can do," she said. "We do not ask for names here unless you want to give them. Skills matter more than names." "I weld," I said. "I keep engines alive. I have a generator. I can make brackets. I can keep a truck reliable in weather. I can do quiet power for short stretches. I have a small rocket stove that works. I can fix a door that does not want to close." "Good," Elena said. "We always need doors. We need more heat at a place 2 blocks from here where we keep stores. We also have a person on the point who cannot leave easily. We bring them things. We take things back." "It is not charity," Tom said. "We trade in safety and time. You help us with a bracket for a hand pump that keeps freezing. We help you with something you need. We keep the rhythm." He tapped 2 fingers to his wrist again. "Light." I told them about the tapping at my east door. The room went still while I explained the 5-minute cycle. The clean hand, the foam pad, the plate, the coat that was not taken. I expected skepticism. I found none. Ruth wrote fast. Elena's eyes were soft in a way that made it easy to keep talking. Kaito glanced toward the radio and back. "I worked with a group once," Elena said when I was done, "with people who used metronomes to keep their attention from scattering. The pattern becomes a center. If the pattern is strong enough, it holds when many other things do not. We do not know enough yet to know what is left in people after this illness, but we can notice the parts that look like remnants of care." "What do we do about it?" I asked. The heat from the barrel stove had thawed the ache in my hands and replaced it with a different kind of ache, the one that comes when you let yourself feel safe for 5 minutes. "We do not open your door," Tom said flatly. "We do not invite it in because we want to be kind. We give it a coat within reach if it ever reaches. We keep the sand fresh so you do not slip when you have to move. We do not make it our project or our failure. We mark your alley with blue on one pole so we know you have heat if someone else needs a warm place. We add a small green tag because you have a radio. We leave your name off the map because names can get used wrong." I breathed out. "All right." Kaito spoke for the first time in a complete sentence. "Malik's test reached us," he said. "I think he will try again longer. If a ring of warm places can hold at the same time, we could ladder the power. We would need resistive loads set to soak, not motor loads that surge. He asked for that deliberately. He is careful. I can put a baseboard heater on a transfer, I said. I already built it. I can switch when he calls. Good, Kaito said. I will relay if he cannot reach you. We made 3 plans around the map. One for keeping the stores from freezing, one for a potential move of a person from a 3rd-floor apartment with a stuck stairwell door, and one for how to leave marks for traveling strangers who might otherwise test every knob and waste what strength they have. The marks were simple: chalk arrows, ribbons, and small piles of stones. I left with a thermos of hot tea and a paper with hand signals drawn in clear lines. Back at my shop, I felt the tapping at the door like a greeting. I answered once with the ratchet and went back to work, cutting and drilling a bracket for a hand pump that Tom had described. In the quiet between generator runs, I could hear the barrel stove at the community shop in my mind. It made a sound like a steady exhale. I tried to copy that rhythm in my own rocket stove. It seemed to work better when I kept the feed small and consistent instead of stuffing and starving it. Systems like steady hands. That night, Malik pushed power through longer, a full 3 minutes. My small heater drank it like sunshine. I heard cheers faintly through the radio and smiled into my sleeve. "We are not heroes," Malik said when he signed off. "We are just stubborn." Stubborn is a word I can work under. Storms lined up over the lake and took turns with the city. We shoveled roofs and eased drifts away from vents. We kept the generator schedules short. We walked in pairs when we needed to skitter across the wide streets that hold wind. We marked our doors with ribbon colors. I hung a blue ribbon for heat and a small green tag for radio, just as Tom had promised. The tapping kept time through all of it. The 5th minute, a small bell only I could hear from bed. One morning, the tapping did not come. I waited 5, then 10. I climbed the ladder to the roof and peered over. The figure still stood near the door, head forward, one hand raised an inch below the surface of the steel. Frost caked the eyelashes and the corners of the mouth. Snow had drifted against the shins. The stillness was total in a way the body cannot fake. I sat on the roof with my legs crossed and counted to 60 slowly and let the air sting my throat. I did not go down to the alley. I did not open the door. Tom came an hour later with sand. He stopped in the middle of the alley and looked. He did not move closer. He took off his hat for a second, put it back on, and then did his job. He refreshed the arc by the threshold and packed the snow over the plate so it would not slide if pressed. He placed the coat on the drum again, closer by a foot. He left. I walked away from the door and went to the workbench. I took a carburetor apart that did not need service and set the parts on a clean rag and put them back together, and then took them apart again. My hands did what they always do. My eyes did what they had to do to see. The room looked the same. The room was not the same. At noon, I told Elena. I did not describe anything that would put images in her head she could not unsee. I told her the rhythm had ended. She was quiet a long time. "Then you kept a clock together with someone," she said finally. "Until you could not. That matters." That evening, after dark, I heard a soft sound outside the door like snow easing off a branch. The plate shifted a fraction. I picked up the ratchet and put it down. I turned on the CO detector's backlight so I could see it better in the corner of my eye. I sat in the chair and watched the second hand on the old analog wall clock meet the minute marks. I found myself listening for a tap that did not come, and realizing I would listen for it every 5 minutes anyway for a while. That is how systems work when you shut them down. Phantom vibration remains. Over the next week, we did not speak outside about what lay in the alley. We kept our movements clean and deliberate. Tom and Ruth came by the shop to pick up the pump bracket. Elena stood by the barrel stove and checked Kaito's blood pressure with a manual cuff because old skills stay useful when machines are stubborn. Malik tied his little islanded grid to a few more blocks, and the heat in my baseboard hummed longer. We learned to lift a hand and tap 2 fingers against our wrists when we wanted to ask how much longer, without speaking, and to answer by holding up a number of fingers, 1, 2, 3. On a morning that dawned painfully bright, I shoveled the roof and found that the weight of the drift had shifted. Snow has moods. When it leans wrong, it wants to bring things with it. I cut a trench to the drain, cleared it, and watched water disappear with a small, satisfying whirl. I looked up at the lake and saw a dark line where the ice had cracked and refrozen overnight. Across the city, small smoke threads rose from chimneys we recognized now on site. The community shop's barrel stove, the house with the woman who taught us to make bannock bread on a frying pan, the duplex where someone had hung bright cloth in the window as art against the white. In the afternoon, a new voice broke in on the radio, speaking quickly as if rehearsed. It warned of a group moving up from the interstate near the Mesaba interchange, testing doors, prying open sheds, forcing people to choose. It said they hit a pharmacy and left it stripped of anything useful, and left a mark of 3 X's spray-painted on the wall. Tom looked at me and tapped 2 fingers against his wrist hard. Time was suddenly not a soft thing. We made a plan. We would not confront, we would not bargain. We would reduce what they could take that would hurt others. We turned off the visible lights that could draw attention and switched to low lanterns in the backs of rooms. We moved supplies from the stores near the front to deeper places. We swept our footprints from snow where they led into side yards. We left small decoys, a cracked gas can that looked full but was not, a toolbox with 3 broken sockets and a tape measure that would stick. When the group came through, they moved with swagger that looked practiced and brittle. They kicked doors, laughed, argued. They did not look up much. They did not listen well. They missed the blue ribbons and the small green tags because they did not know the code. To them, it was just color on a winter day. They spray-painted 3 X's on a barber shop and broke mirrors and left. The sound bled for hours after they were gone, the way a cold pipe keeps pinging heat after you shut it off. The next morning, I went to the alley and stood on Tom's sand. The plate at the door had shifted another inch. I could see the outline where snow had settled differently for days and now sagged. I lifted my hand and touched the steel with my glove. I tapped once with my knuckles out of habit and immediately stopped, heart thudding at the pointlessness. I turned and looked up at the slice of sky and promised myself I would keep time anyway, if not for a person who could no longer hear it, then for the work that still needed doing at noon and 2 and at dark. The cold deepened. The lake floored itself with ice nearer the shore. We learned to move like people from a place that requires deliberate steps. Malik's little grid held enough that we could schedule windows of heat and charge tools in brief bursts. We shared a wordless rule. When your window came, you did the thing that helped the most people first. When mine came, I cut more brackets, sharpened blades, welded a hinge back onto a door Randall on the next block needed for his stairwell. I kept my own lights low. I ran the generator less. I stretched the oil by ounces and kept the whiteboard updated like a promise. One night, very late, when the air was a truth you cannot bargain with, the radio hissed and delivered 2 words from far down the point under weak conditions. Help, please. Kaito looked at Elena. She looked at me. We did not talk about it. We knew the ice on the canal could hold a person, but not foolishness. We knew the road on the point had drifts that hid stalled cars like sleeping animals. We knew the group with the spray paint might still be out there. We also knew that help left to another day might not be help. We went. Tom took the lead on foot. snowshoes strapped, a coil of rope over his shoulder. I pulled a narrow sled with a small heater, blankets, and a medical bag Elena packed with quiet hands. Kaito carried a radio in a padded case against his chest and a collapsible mast. We moved with our shoulders down, heads low, pausing at corners to listen. The city in deep cold has a voice if you let it speak first. It told us where the ice on the sidewalks was honest and where it put a new skin over old. At a drifted stop near 15th Street, we heard a tapping. Not on metal, on wood. A patient, periodic knock, muted by snow. We stood very still. The knock came again, 5 minutes later by Tom's count, at a door half buried at the side of a house. The sport of coincidence can break a person's belief or cement it. I felt mine settle like a tool in a drawer. We dug. The snow was dry and light but crusted in layers. We worked without speaking, trading the shovel and the scoop without fuss, keeping the rope ready. The door came into view, a simple wooden panel with peeling paint. The knob did not turn. Inside, an answer came. One soft knock, then stillness. Elena pressed her ear to the wood and closed her eyes. 2, she whispered. We wedged the bar under the edge and lifted. The wood creaked. The latch held. Tom tapped the hinge pins with a drift punch and worked them out like he was taking apart a stuck brake caliper pin. The door opened 2 inches and stopped on ice. We slid the small heater into the gap and let it breathe for a minute. Warm air makes ice consider new relationships. We pried again. The door moved. Inside, a man sat on a step with a blanket around his shoulders and a metronome in his lap, the kind with a little swinging arm and a weight you slide. He was not sick in the way we had come to fear. He was shivering and worn out, and had been keeping his own time to keep his mind from fracturing in the cold. He had run out of matches. He had run out of nerve to push through a drift that looked like a wall. He had not run out of rhythm. We wrapped him and poured warm tea into him and put him on the sled. He kept one hand on the metronome, not protectively, but like a person touching a dashboard in an old truck, to thank it for getting him home. When we reached the community shop, the barrel stove took him in, and Elena's hands found the work they had practiced all their life. He slept with the metronome on the shelf above him, still, its arm at rest. I went back to my shop at dawn. The alley lay pale and clean. The plate at the door had drifted over. I brushed the snow away and reset it square because the habit of making edges true is not about who sees you do it. It is about telling yourself you're still the kind of person who makes edges true. I stood for a long minute with my palm on the steel. I tapped once, very soft, not to call or command, but to say that I understood something about time again. Winter tightened, but it did not break us. We learned to share hours like we shared heat. We tested the length of extension cords not as leashes, but as threads between rooms. We drew a better map with ribbons and chalk. We tuned antennas and walked salt to thresholds and filtered oil through cloth and let the small heater hum on Malik's signal. We did not fix the whole thing. We kept our part running. One day, in late winter, the lake cracked loud enough that we felt it in the soles of our feet. The ice sighed and shifted and made a sound like a beam settling in an old building. Kaito lifted his head and smiled without showing teeth. Ruth wrote the date and the hour in her book. Elena wrapped a scarf around a child we had not known lived 3 doors down because people keep appearing when you give them a line to follow. Tom refilled the sand bucket and tapped 2 fingers to his wrist, then held up 5 fingers and smiled, small and private. I tapped back the same way without thinking and felt something unknot. I still had a long list on the whiteboard: oil levels, filter changes, brackets needed, doors to fix. A valve that stuck. A hinge that squeaked. Small things. They add up to a place that holds. My shop was still a shop, not a fort. It had never been meant to be a home, but in the winter it became one. I kept the generator schedule lean. I ran the rocket stove with care. I rationed my words like fuel and spent them where they did the most work. And sometimes, at the top of an hour, I stood by the east door and listened while silence kept time with me, the 5th minute rolling past like a clean bearing, and I let that be enough for the day. When spring began to argue with winter in small ways, sun stronger, shadows softer, I still planned as if the snow would last forever, because plans built for the hard season will survive the easy. The infected did not vanish in the melt. They slowed and pooled where shade lingered and then moved again when the nights went above freezing. We did not learn a cure. We did not build a wall. We built schedules and hand signals and small grids that hummed for a while each afternoon. We took pride in hinges that swung true, and pumps that did not freeze, and plates set square at doors where someone might one day need a second. If you ask me what saved us that winter, I will not say courage. I will say timing. I will say stubborn maintenance. I will say the way a person will choose to stand in an alley and pour a line of sand so a stranger's boot will not slip at the wrong second. I will say a metronome on a shelf in a warm room, arm at rest, not because time has stopped, but because people have chosen to share it. I will say a mechanic's habit of checking oil and listening for irregular coughs and drilling a drain hole in a doghouse so condensation has somewhere to go. None of it looks like hero work when you write it down. All of it is how we waited for winter and made it to the other side. And when the map grows again and the lake lets boats move and the bridge lifts once more on a morning that feels like a memory you can hold, I will still keep a ratchet near the east door. I will still mark the whiteboard. I will still count in quiet ways. Because the world outside can shudder and shift, but a shop that hums and a schedule that keeps people from slipping and a 5-minute rhythm that once kept fear from becoming noise, that is how a mechanic like me understands survival. One tap, then the next, measured, careful, enough. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.